And Liz is the executive director of MAHUBE-OTWA Community Action, which is in Minnesota, northern Minnesota. And Liz and her team, a phenomenal team at MAHUBE-OTWA, have been on a journey to shift to a whole family approach, to deeply listen to families, to center their work in racial equity since before 2018. So they've been on this journey a couple of years, and Liz is going to help us set the stage for thinking about two-gen whole family and centering in whole family approach concepts. Liz, since she has taken on the helm of MAHUBE-OTWA, has really built a leadership team, strengthened the capacity of her organization. She's a certified community action professional, and she's a generous leader who shares many blessings with all of us whenever we call on her. So I'm going to hand this over to Liz, and just happy to be with all of you and be together in this space. You all certainly are a blessing to all of us. So Liz, take it away.
Thanks so much, Jeannie. And I see shout outs for CCAPs in the house. So yay for all the CCAPs. I want to start with just on Tuesday mornings, we have on staff, we have an Ojibwe language group. And so, so I thought I should just introduce myself in Ojibwe. I'm in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, which is in Indian country. So Liz, Kuoppola Indigenous Cause, Iron Range, Indunjaba, Gamin, Indododemisi. So that just means my name is Liz Kuoppola, as Jeannie mentioned. I'm from the Iron Range of Minnesota. I don't have a tribe. I'm a white person, but happy to be here. And I think someone else controlling the slides. So next slide. We'll run right through these. So as I mentioned, we serve 5,000 square miles, very rural counties. Up in west central northwest Minnesota. Our largest town has 13,000 people. Next slide. So our organization is very similar to many community action agencies. We have this typical programs that many of us have. The size of our organization, just to give you a sense, I think we're pretty medium size. 16,000 clients a year, about a $17 million annual budget, 150 staff, 18-member board. Next slide. So the motivation to join the whole family community of practice, and I just cannot say enough about the community of practice kind of learning module. The folks at the National Partnership are going to put you through the ringer, but stick with it. It was life-changing for our organization. But we started because when I started here 4 years ago, I met with individual board members, and they wondered, why is it that we continue to serve some of the same families generation after generation? So we had grandma in Head Start. Now we have, now then the child became a parent and their kid is, and why is it that some people aren't moving out of poverty? And so that was our motivation to take a look. Next slide. So we have a couple innovations I'm going to talk to you about. One was a new look at the Crisis to Thrive scale. Next slide. So we've all seen this in community action, at least, this type of Crisis to Thrive scale, where we look at all of the different factors and where are people, and we kind of report this to the Office of Head Start. Next slide, we'll talk about what we changed this to. So this was our big innovation number one. We thought, instead of having folks come in as a Head Start parent, a Head Start child, housing client, weatherization, we wanted to look at them as a person, as a family, and even extended family, and try to find out which of these 5 levels they're at. So if someone comes to us at level 1, this is a health emergency. They are either immediate homeless, in their car on the street homeless, mental health crisis, domestic violence, or chemical dependency crisis. We need to address that right away, no matter what door they're coming in. And that moves them to level 2, or they might come in at level 2 This is where we get them signed up for any benefits they might qualify for within our organization. Our board likes to think of this as our whole family, whole organization, whole community approach, this level 2 kind of benefit. So within public, private, inside our organization, or externally in the community, we think that in about 30 days, we can get people connected to the benefits. You know, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but we can get them connected to everything they qualify for and want. Then that moves them to level 3, or they might come in at level 3. And this is relationship-based coaching. Our goal is to move people up to 200% of poverty. So in level 3, we sit down with them and we try to really understand. We make sure that they're not in level 1 or level 2. We help kind of get a basic grounding under them. We sit down with them and just try to understand what's their hope, what's their dream, do they have dreams, can we help them dream, and pick one of 3 paths towards 200% of poverty. So one path is an education path, and we don't care, is it English as a second language, is it college, is it learning a skill? So an education path or an employment path, is it gaining some job skills, is it changing jobs, is it getting your first job, increasing hours, figuring out what kind of work fills your passion, something that will get you on a path eventually to 200% of poverty. And then as we were talking with our families about this level 3, they wanted a big or something else category. So we have that in here as well. The or something else might be, someone might be dealing with sobriety or cancer or getting their kids back from foster care or something that is the big life challenge that they're dealing with. We want to help them with that. Then as they're working on level 3 and they kind of have their path in place, then we move them to level 4, asset building. And so many of us, we're building assets our entire lifetime. And so we think of assets both as financial assets, savings accounts, saving for car repairs, just all kinds of financial things, but also connection to culture, connection to friends and family network, faith community, just sort of shoring up all of the supports around you, social supports, financial supports that will help you prevent against backsliding. And then many of us, we work on asset building our entire life, but once you're kind of on a path and you kind of know what you're working towards, then you move to level 5, or you can come in the door at level 5. And this is giving back, leadership development, volunteerism. We've had some of our former Head Start parents run for local office, for example, or serve on boards or policy council, and so that's level 5. So this was a big shift to think about where people are at and how to move them holistically forward, instead of thinking like they have a transportation barrier or they have a housing barrier. What if they have both a housing barrier and a transportation barrier, and how can we address them holistically? Next slide. All right, so this brings us to innovation number 2, and where I feel like this is what I'm here to talk about today, but that shift to those 5 levels was so critical. And so this innovation number 2 is relationship-based coaching. The platinum rule is treat others as they want to be treated, not as, the golden rule is treat others as you want to be treated. Platinum, treat others as they want to be treated. Next slide. All right, so I'm gonna cover all of these things, but just they're kind of laid out. Jeannie and others already covered sort of a whole family approach. Look at what helps the kids, look at what helps the parents, look at what helps the whole family. In our area, we've also really been thinking about seniors, how to connect folks with grandparents, talk about equity and inclusion, and the human services value curve. So if you're not familiar with that, we'll get there, and trauma informed, of course. Next slide. We'll walk through each of these aspects. So to look at equity, we first wanted to see, how are we doing? How do the racial demographics of the community of people compare with the demographics of our clients, staff, and board? And so POCI is people of color, indigenous people. So we looked at, from the census data, when you look at people in poverty, what % of the people in poverty in our communities are people of color? 34%. And then what % of our clients are people of color? 15%. And so this is a problem for us because it means that we are contributing to racial disparities unintentionally, of course. But if our job is to help people achieve self-sufficiency, and if we are not reaching even, close to, we're fewer than half of the people of color in our communities and Indigenous people, that's a concern for us. Then we also looked at what percent of our staff was people of color, and it was only 9% at the time we started this. What percent of our board? It was 11% at the time we started. And so the board said, let's start with ourselves as the board. So they did a number of things, started a board book group where they discussed race at every board meeting. They focused on recruiting board members of color and Indigenous board members. And so we're currently at 44% of our board are people of color. And we think if we can start with the board, then we can kind of develop the policies and procedures to increase diversity in our staff and clients. Next slide. All right, the other thing, as we looked at our client base, we looked at, of the Head Start families, how many of them were accessing other agency services at MAHUBE? And we just assumed, when I asked staff, we just assumed that close to 100% of our Head Start parents were accessing energy assistance because our staff did a brilliant job of making those referrals. But then we lost track because it was a completely different department. The people making the referrals didn't know if the families were actually getting energy assistance or if they got blocked somewhere along the way. So when we started this, only 5% of our Head Start families were accessing family planning, 8% our tax aid program, 44% energy assistance, and only 9% our family homeless prevention and assistance program. And so this is something I just encourage you to look at instead of just going with what you think to be true. This was staggering for our staff to learn and ended up shaping our work and really getting people on board. Next slide. So one of the things we did in that level 3 relationship-based coaching, we started this CLIMB initiative. And so we looked for Head Start families who wanted to opt in to this because we're building this plane as we're flying it. Everybody was busy doing their own job and we didn't have any new money. And, so we're just trying to do this as we're going along. But so we named it CLIMB, partly because you're climbing those ladders and partly because it makes this fun acronym. But we looked for who's ready to kind of take the next level of engagement. And then we tried to decrease caseload sizes so we could really join, partner. And we asked families to commit to 1 year of working more closely with us. Next slide. Diversity, equity, inclusion. We wanted to make sure these families weren't just white families, or that we weren't adding to disparities by doing it, but several ways we've tackled diversity, equity, inclusion together. So I mentioned the monthly board discussion items, adding people of color and Indigenous people to the board. We encourage all staff to take the Harvard's implicit bias test and to do intentional reflection. It's free. You can Google it if you're not familiar. I don't know if you're familiar with intercultural development inventory. Let me just do this real quick. The IDI, it's an assessment you take through a qualified administrator, and it tells you where you are on your ability to embrace difference on a scale from denial, there is no difference, polarization, my group is better than that group, or that group is better than my group, minimization, where we try to just say like, well, we all bleed red, we're all the same, we're all just humans. We're humans. So that's minimization. Acceptance is recognizing that we have differences, but we don't really know what to do with it. And then adaptation is sort of evolving and changing based on bringing everybody's kind of strengths to the fore. So what the IDI does, it's an assessment that tells you where you are as a person and where you think you are. And most of us think we're a step ahead of where we actually are. So it gives you steps on what you can do, since you already see yourself there, what you could do so that you're there sort of in practice. So we have IDI qualified administrators on staff, have a goal of all staff completing IDI plans. We're not quite there, but will be by the end of this year. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion committee before COVID, but so we took a little pause during COVID when we've been working remotely, but there's been discussion just in the past couple of weeks to restart these Friday Film Fests. So we would have a film festival that anyone on staff who had could join us, would join us. We'd watch a film together that just had some aspect of diversity. We're spread out across 5 counties, so we had different Fridays. The film went around different areas. And then we had a discussion about the film. So we're going to do that now over Zoom instead going forward. We have an agency-wide book group. This year, our whole staff are reading Anton Troyer's book, Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians, but We're Afraid to Ask. And then we have discussions about that throughout the year. Try to recognize things like, coming out day and those kinds of things. And I mentioned already the Ojibwe language study group. So very small steps, but I think steps any organization can do to just try to move the conversation along. I just want to acknowledge we're just tipping our toes in the water and there's so much more work to do, but we're trying. Next slide. And good links in the chat here for folks to the IDI, the implicit bias test, so keep an eye on the chat. So I just want to clarify, a lot of times we say diversity, equity, inclusion all together as though it's one word. So one way we think about it at our shop, would encourage you to think about it as well or reflect on this, but diversity, another way of saying that is count the people. So how many people of what backgrounds are you serving? And that's where we did our little analysis of how many people of color are, in our clients, in the community, on our staff and board. Inclusion is creating space so that the people who are here, they count. So when people of color on our staff have an idea, or I'm lesbian in very conservative environment, I want to be able to be my full self. And so that's what we mean by inclusion, is how can we create space for everybody, regardless of their position, regardless of their racial background, have a space where everybody's voice counts, everybody's experience counts. That's what inclusion is, and that's what we're working towards. Equity is really a focus on the outcomes count. So we can do all the book discussion groups, we can do all of the learning like language we want, we can have events, but if we're not seeing a difference in outcomes, then we're not reaching equity. And so keeping an eye towards outcomes and what actually is changing in people's lives is that's where we're aiming. And so we're not celebrating these other things until we get to that. Next slide. So to listen to people and to treat people the way they want to be treated has to be rooted in trauma. And so we use, similar to the IDI, having these different levels of, like I just described, denial, polarization, minimization. We wanted to create something. So this is the work of Chandler Esslinger, who was with us for a while, moved on to North Dakota, but we wanted to create a similar thing so you could find wherever you are. I'd heard too many people, a lot of people got ACEs training and they came back and they were like, now what? And so we wanted to go from how to learn trauma basics to informed. And so I'm happy to email anyone. There's worksheets and workbooks, all kinds of things to kind of figure out where you are as a person, as a team, as an organization, and then what are some steps you can take to move to the next level. It's not enough to just go to a training. We have to all be working towards, getting to written policies that reflect a trauma-informed approach. We're doing system integration, or tracking student and community outcomes. So this trauma-informed care is really rooting our process as well. Next slide. All right, so this I could talk about all day, but I'm going to just do real quick. This is called the Human Service Value Curve. And this has been so critical. I told our leadership team I wanted to get this tattooed on my body, because when I came across this, when I learned about it, it was mind-blowing for me. So Harvard Business School had been studying businesses forever, for hundreds of years or whatever, on what makes an effective and efficient business, what makes businesses successful. And then a couple decades ago or something, they started wondering what would make the social service sector, what's similar and what's different than the for-profit sector. And what they came up with is the least efficient and least effective is a regulative business model. And this is where we just follow the regulations. We do the things that might not make any sense, but the funder says we have to do them. Or, you know, so that is the least effective and efficient. Of course, we have to do what funders want, but there's better ways. So collaborative is the next best, most effective and efficient. This is where we get together with our partners in the community and we collaborate. Instead of just doing what the rule is, we kind of partner with others doing similar work and we say, hey, how can we get better outcomes for the people we're serving? And that's great. That's better. Next better is integrated services. So if we can, instead of just responding to challenges, if we can integrate services. So if we can say, you know, how do we get mental health services in the school building so that before kids are kicked out of school or before, you know, that we can get them the services that would be helpful to them. That's kind of integrated. How can we think just a little bit ahead and integrate services so we can create better upward mobility for folks, a better safety net? And then the next is a generative business model. And this is how can we even get ahead of the challenges? We talk about, you know, generational change and how can we create the kinds of communities we want to live in? And so, you know, our strategic plan is to analyze everything we're doing and look at where it's regulative, where we can be more collaborative, integrated, or generative. And I'm doing that all of the time. And that has changed our minds all the time. So now whenever a staff says to themselves or to me, like, how come, you know, how come we got to kick this person off this program when they need it and they just moved across the county line? Then we try to look at, well, what would be a collaborative, integrative, or generative model to helping this family? And it's true, maybe we can't help with that fund, but maybe we can help with something else. So if you're not familiar, good tool for your toolbox. Next slide. All right, so family voice. This was so critical and a tool that the being part of the community of practice really helped us with, is listening closely to families on what their experience was and humbling ourselves to listen to what it was from how they first heard about us, how they got themselves to the front door or to a phone call, what that experience was like, thinking about what anxieties or hopefulnesses or what, and then what the next steps were. And some people had really good stories to tell. Others had really challenging stories. And so we listened to the stories of the people who receive our services. We did focus groups with them. We also listened very closely to frontline staff. And we did a cohort of staff who are former recent clients. And we listened really hard to get ideas on what we could do differently, what the experiences were like, instead of what we told ourselves, because we thought we were pretty awesome. But when we listened to stories and listened carefully for where could we improve, we got a lot of ideas. And then I want to just speak to 7 generations. As I mentioned, we're in Indian country here. And sometimes when you think about 7 generations, it seems like, oh my goodness, that's my children's 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 children's, and I can't even imagine what the world will be like. But another way to think about 7 generations is to think back to your great grandparents, who you might not know, but reflect, like learn about your great grandparents' experience, your grandparents, your parents, your own, and then your children, grandchildren. And within that, what are the wisdoms? When I look back, my grandparents are passed on now, but they lived during the 1918 flu. And so I've been doing a lot of asking our older relatives, what was that like? How did they cope? And so that too, and encouraging our clients to think back to their grandparents and great grandparents, what strengths and resilience did they find that we can tap into, and what do we want to pass on? Next slide. Yeah, let me see, just, yeah, keep scrolling down here. Employee training series, super critical to, we really, and many of your organizations are way ahead of us, but we hadn't done the Strengths Finder trainings yet. And so we've really invested not just in Strengths Finder whole series, we've trained all of our staff, but also What does it mean to have a person-centered approach? What does that mean for the frontline staff, the staff who are working directly with families? But what does it mean for their supervisors? What does it mean for staff in our fiscal office to be able to create flexible funds, so that we can have a person-centered approach at the front line? So we've been really ramping up our training, and I'm happy if folks want more details on what that training series has been. Happy to get you in. Really, the national partnership knows all these things as well. Next slide. All right, so 3 years into our transformation, what's changed? Because when we first started this, we were like, oh my goodness, we're already working hard enough just doing what we're doing. How can we possibly change? Or, oh my goodness, we changed that Head Start database 2 years ago and we still haven't gotten used to it. How can we make more change? So next slide. All right, so when we look to our employee survey results, when we started to where we are now, our staff, 150 folks weigh in on this, believe that our organization makes clear what our priorities are and what's most important. It used to be 66%, now it's 91%. And so that's leading to staff retention and just overall staff morale. Staff, I have consistent access to data for making decisions about my work from 48% to 74%. Before we'd hear like, I'm putting all this stuff in the computer, like, I don't know what it's good for. And so we said, how would you like to use that? How could you use data to better serve your families you're working with? And then they gave us ideas and we kind of made that work. So we changed things up for them. And then we regularly assess and improve key admin and work processes. 53 to 75. We still have, that's still just a C. Still have a lot of work to do on that. I think there's a couple more survey results here. Or maybe not. Next slide. Yep. So our turnover rate with these changes decreased from 25% to 14%. Still not great, but taking on these big goals has actually helped us, help people feel more connected, more like they can make a difference in the organization, and more like they want to stick around and do this work. So don't be scared of change. Like, just take it from the family-centered approach, and you'll be great. Next slide. So I think there's one more here as well. All right, so community results. Proud to partner with our local college. We got their President's Award for Civic-Minded Employer. But I think it just seems to me like it speaks to the connections we've been building in the community to have a connection that strong. Better relationships with large employers, generous contribution of a foundation grant of 1.5 million. So when we started, there was no money. But as we just kept making our plans and talking about our dreams and getting the word out there, funds started to flow. And tomorrow, I'm going to be able to share some exciting news. So I'll get it to your group so you can know about it, but just more exciting news for us. So secured public and private funding, did some advocacy, increased, really helped TANF families, MFIP families in Minnesota get that extra $100 a month. Not everything, but a step, and really taught some advocacy skills along the way. The org Facebook page too. We grew from 300 to 3,000 followers just because it seemed like we had more good news to share. So it just seems like we came alive in a way by kind of pursuing what seemed most important. Next slide. So I wanted to share just some results because we've all been dealing with this pandemic this year. And so I wanted to just share with you that our whole family approach, even during the pandemic, these are Head Start families that we've been focusing in our Climb initiative, who have gotten out of that crisis and are kind of ready to set bigger goals. So 3 of them bought homes during the pandemic. 2 during the pandemic completed an RN degree. A couple completed AA degrees. 3 enrolled in GED. This is out of a group of just 30 families. 4 gained first-time full employment. 4 got their driver's license. They'd been revoked because of fines and fees. 3 created banking accounts. And so this is during the pandemic. People are just seeing dramatic change in their lives. And it has been the thing that I think has inspired our staff and me certainly more than anything else to kind of carry on through whatever the world can throw at us. Next slide. Yeah, so some of the ways we changed as an organization, we added, with generous support of funders, we added more family coaches to decrease the size of our, some people call them family advocates, we call them family service workers in Head Start. Their caseloads have been just really, really high, and they couldn't, they were so busy just kind of chasing down the last crisis and trying to connect. So we really were able to shrink down those caseloads, plus give them a coach mentor who isn't a supervisor to really kind of help them just grapple with, you know, feelings and frustrations and just their own humanity. And so that's been huge. We added or created a data analyst position, who's now, she's become a Roma implementer. So go Roma. But that's been great to help us really look at data in new ways, not just what the funder wants, but what do we at MAHUBE-OTWA want? And what do our frontline staff need to know to be able to better serve people? Increased focus on professional development, lots of training, focusing on assets for the climb cohort. Oh, and incentives and barrier elimination funds have been pretty critical to just help people knock down any barriers, kind of moving more into that generative space, but also create incentives for people when they do good. The incentives are sometimes a handwritten note, sometimes it's a gas card, sometimes it's a computer. So I think I've got a couple ahas here, and then we'll wrap up and give the mic back. So some aha moments for us: just go slow and steady. You'll get there. Start small. Learn from others. This cohort model, I just cannot say enough. We learned so much from our peers across the country, and I still do. I mean, we just, it's, yeah, do some planning, work on your organizational culture. Really just think about that. Get out of this defensive space we're all in all the time when we're trying to prove to our funders that we do good. Really think about what's empowering your staff, what's empowering clients. And then by changing up staff, aligned with our shift in thinking, the smaller caseloads, coach mentor, that's been helpful as well. I think I'm about out of time, and that's kind of what I wanted to say. I'm sorry it wasn't, I can say here, I've got a couple slides. So we also at the same time really embrace the code of ethics from the National Community Action Partnership. Encourage you to do that. All of our supervisors discuss the ethics, our staff sign on to the ethics. We use that to kind of do our focus. We, at the same time that we did the community of practice, we joined the Pathways to Excellence process. Completely crazy to do that, but also it just helped us really get grounded in what could our potential be. We had our first CCAPers just in 2018 or something, and got most of our leadership team now through CCAP. Oh, and poverty simulations. We joined the Community Action in Missouri to sort of, before COVID here, to do poverty simulations around the community to get everybody more connected, you know, or strategic partners more connected. All right, we have a Q&A in my contact info slide, but we can skip past that. So with that, I turn this back over. Feel free, Liz Kuoppola at MAHUBE, my name will be in your stuff, I'm sure. Feel free to reach out to us. We are very, very happy to help anytime. This whole family team, this is our team. We check in for 30 minutes every single week. That's all we do, 30 minutes every single week. And it helps us move the ball forward. We've had very robust agendas for those meetings, but 30 minutes a week, you can change the world. I do not believe we have time for questions, but turn it back over to the
Liz.
Yeah.
As my colleague Tiffany Marley would say, I'm levitating. That was so inspirational. But I just want to remind everybody on the Zoom event today, you were covering a 3-year period, right? Like you highlighted a lot of work, but that happened over 3 years, right? And yep. You know, you just have to start, right? And you guys started, and it was like a flywheel. You've just built so much more momentum. And I meant to say this when I introduced you, but folks are recognizing your work, right? And they're investing in it because they see you have a clarity, you have a focus, you have capacity, and people want to be a part of that. So I think you're a proof point for if you get some clarity and intentionality and you know your North Star, great things really start to happen, right?
I would 100% agree with that. And the amounts of support we're getting in now that I'll tell you about tomorrow, but just mind blowing. There's no way I would have even fathomed this back then. But don't do it because of the money. Do it because it's the right thing to do. Share your dream and vision with others, and the resources will come together. Zero doubt.